So I'm a father of one. I gotta find a babysitter. I found care.com and I was blown away. Through the platform, I was able to find local and experienced candidates along with their reviews and rates, which were way more affordable than I anticipated. Care.com really put me at ease knowing that they were all required to go through a background check. If you're like me and you need to find someone reliable for your childcare necessities, check out care.com. Find the ideal sitters for your childcare needs.
I'm Tim Fitzgerald at GoPowerCat.com.
And I'm Scott Chasen with Fog.net.
This is a replay of WIBW's TV show, The Drive.
Here's this week's episode on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network.
Good evening, Wildcat and Jayhawk fans, and welcome to The Drive, sponsored by Briggs Auto Group. I am Tim Fitzgerald at GoPowerCat.com. The man across the studio for me is Scott Chasen of Fog.net. Scott, what a game. I actually watched the entire game. It looked like Christmas had broken out in Allen Fieldhouse.
Yeah, I remember if it's a football game years ago, red color rush versus green color rush, the NFL people, colorblind people couldn't necessarily tell the two apart. I didn't see any complaints about that, but all red, all green, it was Christmas in Lawrence.
What did you think of the red uniforms?
Oh, I like the red uniforms. They typically haven't worn them.
No, they don't wear them often.
The official story from KU is they prefer the more like historical throwbacks. The kind of reason that I think a lot of us have seen is that Bill Self can be superstitious. They lost in the red uniforms a couple times, but Devontae Graham a few years ago, he wanted to wear them on senior day, so they brought him back, and then a few years later, they bring him back again.
Nice. It was great. You can interact with us on social media at facebook.com/The Drive Show, on Twitter at The Drive 13, and of course, answer our weekly poll question and make your game predictions on our Twitter page. And remember, if you ever miss an episode of The Drive, you can listen to an audio-only version that will appear each Monday morning in the form of a podcast at both GoPowerCat.com and Fog.net. We start things off with our 2-minute drill. The 2-minute drill is sponsored by Vanderbilt's Your Work Boot Center. Well, Scott, Kansas took down number 2 Baylor on Saturday, ending the Bears' quest for an undefeated season. The Bears were off for 3 weeks due to COVID-19 protocols. So how much can you take away from this game?
Yeah, well, Fitz, that's been the kind of national storyline coming out of this one. It's been less about Kansas and more about Baylor. And look, I understand it. Baylor clearly missing something after being off for 3 weeks. It's not the same Baylor team. But let's also hold on a second. This Baylor team only committed 3 turnovers. This Baylor team was guarded and took a lot of the same guarded shots that it normally takes. People pointed to the rebounding margin. KU out-rebounded Baylor by 20 and said, well, that's a sign it's not the real Baylor. Well, you know why KU out-rebounded Baylor by 20? Kansas had like 12 or 15 more turnovers than Baylor. And when you turn the ball over, you're not shooting, the other team isn't getting a defensive rebound, and you are going to out-rebound them. Look, there are things that Baylor didn't do as well in this game, but there are also things, and there were a lot of things that Kansas did really, really well. You see one of those right there. DeJuan Harris, Mitch Lightfoot, the KU bench found ways to contribute, played well. There was a ton of energy in the building. I think Allen Fieldhouse was supposed to be limited to 2,600 fans. If there were only 2,600 fans in there, I would be surprised. I'm not saying it was double that, but I've heard worse atmospheres at 16,300 packed Allen Fieldhouse non-conference games. The Fieldhouse was absolutely juiced. David McCormick, just been a man on a mission. You know, a lot of talk about his season, Fitz, how much he struggled early, but if you just chopped off the first 3 games, not non-conference play, 3 games, he was averaging something like 14 points, 7 rebounds, shooting 53% from the field on the year. Coming into this game, he scores 20, and how good has KU's defense been? I mean, it's not just rebounding, which you're getting from Jalen Wilson and Christian Brown, but KU has tweaked its ball screen defense. It's made it easier for David McCormick and let him do what he does well. He slides his feet really well on the perimeter to help trap guards. So rather than having him recover back to his man and run and be out of position, something he's really bad at, Bill Self has said, no, let's have him do the thing he's really good at and trap guards on the perimeter, have the wings rotate behind him and cover for his mistakes or when he can't get back to a guy. It has completely changed this KU team. They are a top 10 defense on KenPom. I think they're a top 10 defense nationally.
It was impressive. And look, Baylor was off. There's no doubt about it. But I'm not going to give them an exception because they didn't take care of business off the court and then COVID infected so many guys of the team. That's part of this season. And that's part of the game. But I'm not sure even a healthy Baylor team was going to beat that KU team on that night. They were really good.
They were turned up, to use a Bill Self word. They had a lot of energy.
Were.
It's not always sustainable. Of course, you can't play like you're playing the number 2 team in the country who beat you in Allen Fieldhouse on senior day. Can't always replicate it, but they had a lot of energy. Well,
Very good.
Fitz, K-State had won 2 games in a row heading to West Virginia on Saturday, but with freshman point guard Nijel Pack sitting out with an eye infection. Ouch. The Wildcats lost to the Mountaineers 65-43. How troubling is that kind of an offensive output?
It's really dreadful. I mean, we'll get to Pack more a little bit later in the show, but Kansas State had an opportunity to make it 3 in a row, and before the game we find out Nigel's not playing, and you pretty much knew where this game was going. But then Kansas State's defense, which has been so good, was really good in wins over TCU and then Oklahoma in the last 2 games, really showed up again. And even without Pack, they defended at an extremely high level. Kept the game within striking distance if Kansas State had a real offense. They've scored 62 points in the previous 2 games to win. They gave up 65 here. They've held the previous 2 teams under 60, and that seems to be the number they need to shoot for. What I find interesting about this game was very reminiscent of that KU game in which both offenses were really bad, and K-State's only scored 41 points even though it held KU below 60. K-State just really struggled scoring. I mean, West Virginia's defense is good, it's disruptive, but it's funny how some matchups work in one program's favor over the other. Take Oklahoma. Lon Kruger's never beaten Bruce Weber in Bramlage Coliseum. It almost defies explanation when it happens this year and they're ranked 7th and K-State comes into that game with 2 conference wins. On the other hand, Kansas State can't seem to handle West Virginia and whatever magic potion Bob Huggins gives his team, because once K-State really started to struggle offensively in the second half, West Virginia just kind of pecked away, and pretty soon a single-digit lead was 15, and then it got up above 20 to 25, which was the margin of victory the first time these 2 teams met. K-State turns the ball over too much against West Virginia. They played dreadful again, but this was probably not a game you're going to win if you're K-State. Even if you're rolling, going into Morgantown against a really hot West Virginia team, not a good formula for K-State. They've got 1 left. They've got 1 rescheduled game next Saturday with Iowa State, and that should be entertaining.
Yeah, Fitz, I don't know that there's any greater sign of the offensive struggles that you talked about they went through that game than I think the highlights for that game lasted all of like 20 seconds there on the screen. There were not many to choose from.
Horrible. Davion Bradford was pretty good for K-State, and everyone else was not good at all. It was painful to watch. Well, Scott, we're going to ask this as a poll question later in the show, but let's get started now. Which coaching job has been the best in the Big 12 this year?
Well, Fitz, Big 12 Coach of the Year is always kind of a funny award because Bill Self's only won it a few times, and yet he's won the conference 14 years in a row and 15 out of 17 or whatever. But look, I think there are a few interesting names. Scott Drew, any conversation has to start there. But let's talk about what Mike Boynton has done at Oklahoma State, because it's not just what's going on the court. A lot of it is off the court, too. Yes, they have Cade Cunningham. He is the #1 player in the nation. He's probably going to be the #1 pick in the draft. He led Oklahoma State to this overtime win that you're going to see here. At Oklahoma, a great win, and these 2 teams will actually square off again to start March. Oklahoma State is better than it should be. We've seen teams before have 1 elite talent, whether it was Ben Simmons at LSU, Markelle Fultz at Washington, even Trae Young. That OU team was a borderline tournament team. This Oklahoma State team is borderline ranked. It will be in the tournament. It is probably going to avoid being in that first set of Big 12 tournament games when the 7 seed plays the 10 and the 8 plays the 9, Oklahoma State is probably safe from that, and a large part of that is due to Cade Cunningham. But think about what's gone on off the court, about this team having a postseason ban and players leaving the program and not knowing their future. Cade Cunningham decides to stick it out, and yes, they're appealing that ruling from the NCAA, and so maybe it looks like they will be able to play in the postseason. But for Mike Boynton to keep that group together, playing hard, staying engaged, focused on the task at mind, knowing the NCAA could retroactively wipe it all away or at any moment basically pull the plug on their season, I think he deserves a ton of credit for how he's coached them, especially with everything off the court. Now, obviously, Scott Drew has done a great job. I think Bill Self has helped Kansas recover after a January skid. But I don't know that I wouldn't go with Mike Boynton right now, Fitz, if you asked me to pick my Big 12 Coach of the Year.
I would go with Scott Drew, but in favor of Mike Boynton is this. Until Saturday, I have not been overwhelmed by Cade Cunningham. It's not like he's absolutely carried that team. He's just one of the very good parts that Mike Boynton's put together. And in fact, I've seen games when he gets into foul trouble, goes to the bench, and Oklahoma State actually looks better without Cade Cunningham. And again, that goes to coaching, but how do you deny what Scott Drew's done down in Waco? It's been pretty remarkable. Now a quick look at your poll question results. The poll questions are brought to you by Midland Exteriors. Love the home you live in. Call today for a free estimate.
Well, last week's question was, after Baylor, who is the second best team in the Big 12? And we go to the results here. A lot of people saying Kansas. Now, that might be because, locally, some people are going to support their team. But West Virginia right behind Kansas. Kansas, 56%. West Virginia, 28%. Texas, 9%. Oklahoma, 7%.
I think we can agree that now Kansas and West Virginia have kind of risen above the rest of that group in the middle to be behind Baylor. Here is this week's question. Who should be Big 12 Coach of the Year? We just discussed it. Here are your choices. Scott Drew from Baylor, Bob Huggins from West Virginia, Bill Self from KU, or Mike Boynton from Oklahoma State. Vote on our Twitter page at @TheDrive13.
And that will do it for this half of the 2-minute drill, but we will be right back with more on KU and K-State on The Drive.
Welcome back to The Drive as we continue our weekly 2-minute drill. The 2-minute drill is sponsored by Vanderbilt's Your Work Boot Center. Scott, Saturday was senior day for Marcus Garrett. The 2 other KU seniors will be returning next year. The floor is yours. What has Garrett meant to KU basketball?
Well, Fitz, he's meant a lot. And in many cases, Marcus Garrett is a player who should have been the ultimate glue guy, should have gone down as maybe the best glue guy in the history of college basketball. If you think about it, he's a National Defensive Player of the Year, national. He is the guy who led the Big 12 in assists and assist-to-turnover ratio, but he was never the guy. And in my opinion, that's what a glue guy is, right? He fills a role, he does his thing, he's part of the team, but at the same time, he never really transcends that, and that's kind of what he's been thrust into his senior year. He's had to transcend that and kind of lose that, title of glue guy role because he's been such an important piece for Kansas. Obviously, defensively, what he did in that matchup with Jared Butler was so Marcus Garrett. Jared Butler scored 5 points on 2 of 9 shooting. 0 of those points were scored against Marcus Garrett. Both came after offensive rebounds on free throws. So what does that mean? Jared Butler, a National Player of the Year candidate who scored 30 points with 8 assists in the first meeting against Kansas, got shut out by Marcus Garrett in that game. Marcus Garrett was terrific. Obviously, he's a player that Bill Self loves and cares about a lot and sees a different way than I think Bill Self has with a lot of different players. I think Bill Self and Marcus Garrett, I think they see eye to eye about basketball. I think they see eye to eye despite the fact that they communicate, in so many different or such a different kind of fashion. Think about this. Bill Self talked about how to fire Marcus Garrett up after senior day, or he knows that if Marcus Garrett's in a bad mood, he can take the attention off him, put it on someone else, and let Garrett kind of ease into things. Marcus Garrett at the same time, he's telling Bill Self that he changed his life. He tells Jerrance Howard, who recruited him, that he's like a father figure. But as much as you associate Kansas with guys like Mitch Lightfoot, Christian Brown, who people say, you cut their chest open and a Jayhawk flies out. That's the expression that gets thrown around. Marcus Garrett committed to Kansas, Jerrance Howard told me, without ever taking a visit. When he called Jerrance Howard to commit, Jerrance Howard was shocked. He didn't think he was ready to commit. But Marcus Garrett found a home. He found a place he wanted to play college basketball, which was Kansas, and he knew. And that was it. It was over. His family was there on senior day. Fitz, he's had a good, maybe not an elite KU career. Maybe his jersey won't be hung in the rafters. But man, has he meant a lot to Bill Self, and I think he's meant a lot to KU basketball.
Good life lesson. When you know it's right, trust your gut, man. Go with it. Really good.
As we mentioned earlier, K-State played without Nijel Pack at West Virginia. He's only a freshman, but it seems as if the Wildcats are not competitive without Pack. So, Fitz, how important is Pack to Bruce Weber's program?
He's a difference maker, and keep in mind that during the 2 wins, he wasn't really good offensively, but just having him out there seems to take enough pressure off guys like Mike McGrill and other people where they can go do your thing. Nijel Pack's a really good guard. And he might develop into a superstar type player for K-State, but he's only 5'11"-ish. He really needs someone to kind of handle the weight next to him. They need another big-time scorer. And something interesting has developed this past week. K-State has 2 open scholarships for next year. They don't know if Mike McGurl is going to come back, even though he's eligible to come back with a free season. K-State started recruiting again for the 21 class, which I thought was really interesting, even though they've got 1 signed and 1 committed for the 2 open scholarships. That means they, of course, expect someone to leave, which isn't weird in these day and ages, but it seems like they're really looking for someone to help Nijel Pack, to take some pressure off of him and give him a running mate. We got a column by Michael Goins at Go Powercat about that very topic, how he needs someone to be his wingman going forward because he just can't carry the load. But I'll say this, when he was out with COVID-19, K-State was trash. They were really bad. And even in the game he came back when he wasn't fully healthy and he played more minutes than he should have, was that epic 45-point loss at Baylor. It was just an awful performance by K-State. But after that, with Pack on the court, starting with Texas A&M, K-State started playing better and better, and the defense has gotten better and better, and they look more like a Bruce Weber team. Even though they were losing to teams like Texas and Texas Tech, they were competitive. Big reason, Nijel Pack's leadership. And finally, the defense settled in against TCU, and then an exceptional performance against Oklahoma to get the wins. Nijel Pack's going to be the cornerstone for the program. If for some reason he's a guy that transfers, that should set off alarm bells. But with him and Davion Bradford, the big guy, K-State's got a pretty good setup going forward, but they need more. They can't rest on just this recruiting class.
You know, Fitz, I mean this extremely complimentary of Pack, who I think is a very, very good young player. If you ever watch a random mid-major basketball game, there's usually like 1 guard. He's a little undersized, but he just gets buckets, and he can go off for 20 or 30 any night. Sometimes you wonder, why don't high major programs just go and get that guy and enjoy all that scoring punch and what he develops into? Again, I mean this so complimentary. That's what Nijel Pack has basically shown the promise of already being as a freshman. He's been very good for Kansas State.
And like I said, his scoring's dropped because I think he's just out of gas. So maybe actually the rest here between the eye infection that missed, and if he comes back for the Iowa State game, he'll be really fresh. Well, now let's step out of bounds. And Out of Bounds is brought to you by Copeland Insurance Agency, part of your community for more than 60 years.
Well, Fitz, looks like Baylor will make it through 14 Big 12 regular season games. That's out of 18. But the Bears won't have to play Oklahoma, West Virginia, or Texas twice. Those are the league's 3 highest ranked teams after Baylor. So is it still fair for the Bears to claim the league crown despite not having to play those games?
I'm bothered by it. And at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, they should be league champions. I mean, until Saturday, they were unbeaten in the league no matter who they played. But I'm really bothered by the number of games Baylor's missed. Not saying that they did it on purpose, but they did it kind of recklessly, and it kind of screwed up the rest of the conference. But they will be the ones that pay the price, because what if they lose another game or two coming down the stretch? Do they slide out of a 1 slot with the NCAA tournament? I don't know, but I know this. They better get it together because it's that time of year. Folks, the Big 12 tournament's a week away or 2 weeks away. They've got this open week now to do some rescheduling of games, and Baylor's got like 17 games this week, I think. Well, we'll see. But, yeah, they should be, but it stinks. It's almost like Ohio State did in football. They didn't play enough games, but you can't deny that they're pretty good.
Yeah, I think, and Bill Self kind of put it this way after the game, they're clearly the best team in the Big 12, give them credit, but they didn't have to endure that stretch. I mean, think about Kansas losing 5 road games in a row where it just felt like every week you're playing someone. They didn't have to do that. They got to duck and avoid a lot of these, great teams in the conference. So I think that can make it easier for them, and we will see, like you mentioned, if it hurts them in March.
Yep.
Well, now let's hear from the fans, and our fan question this week is, who wins more Big 12 games next year, K-State football or K-State basketball? That's from Larry in Manhattan. I believe it is directed to you, Fitz.
Wow, this is a good question because you think about it, if football goes 6-3 in the Big 12, that's a really good season. But if they go 6 and what would it be? 12. And I had to look across studio. Math escaped me. 6 and 12 in basketball, not so good. Oh, man. It's like, will football be good and basketball bad? I'm going to go with a tie.
Okay.
I'm going to say they both win 5 games.
Both win 5 games. That's pretty good.
That's not good enough for basketball, let me tell
Yeah.
you.
You want me to answer the question for Kansas basketball versus Kansas football, too?
It's a pretty easy answer.
Well, hey, remember to ask us your questions on our Facebook page and on Twitter at The Drive 13. And when we return, we will look at our predictions here on The Drive.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage, to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify is here to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 15% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. And sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Odyssey Podcast.
Welcome back as we head down the home stretch of this week's show. Now it's time to look at the predictions. Remember to make your weekly predictions on our Twitter page at The Drive 13. Let's look at last week's results. Oh man, I'm going to end up only getting a third of my games right. This is awful. Scott is rolling. He's pulling away from us. It's disgusting. Here's this week's picks, and we start with Oklahoma State, an 8.5-point underdog at West Virginia. Scott, you take.
I will take Oklahoma State to cover here. I guess I have to give Mike Boynton love because I picked him as Big 12 Coach of the Year.
And I will stick with hugs. There's not enough hugs in the world.
Next is UTEP. This was a hard line to figure out. We went with plus 14.5 at Kansas. If it's a big line, we'll see how engaged Kansas is in this game. Who you got?
This is so strange. I mean, Kansas is done with their Big 12 schedule, so they picked up this game. I love it. I love it. I'm going to go with the Miners just because, I don't know, because you want KU?
Yeah, I'll take Kansas. Again, I'm just interested to see how engaged they are because they can win by 15, but will they, I think, is another question.
Yeah, we'll find out. And our last game of the week, we did a pick 'em on this. They're the bottom two teams in the conference. Iowa State comes to K-State on Saturday for that makeup game. I say the Cats win and get to 4 wins in the Big 12 for the season.
I will take Iowa State.
And their first win of the season if that happens. It's been amazing up in Ames. Again, make your predictions on our Twitter page at The Drive 13. Now it's time for our On the Clock segment. On the Clock is sponsored by Carpet One. Buy local for a strong local community. And we start with Mr. Scott Chasen of Fog.net.
Well, a little bracketology update here. You know, it's interesting. Joe Lunardi at ESPN now has Kansas as the lowest 3 seed in the field. And it's funny to think about where this team was in January when if you told fans KU would get a 4 or 5 seed, I think they would have sold out for that. KU lost to Texas last week in overtime, a close game, but I think that probably realistically ends any hope of a 2 seed, short of winning the Big 12 tournament, beating Baylor again, but also Baylor probably having to look pretty good, and maybe even having to beat West Virginia along the way because they're on that 2 seed line. It's hard to see right now, but for Kansas, if you're just focused on staying away from that 1 seed, staying on the other half of whatever regional you go into, I think 2 wins at the Big 12 tournament, I think that's probably enough to get the job done. For Bill Self to put this Kansas team where it is now. Very impressive. Again, a 3 seed in, Joe Lunardi's latest mock-up.
In January, Kansas State was giving up 21 points or losing by 21 points a game in conference play. In February, it dropped to 8. That's how much better K-State basketball got in the course of 1 month. Well, it's a good sign of progress. That's it for this week's edition of The Drive. We will see you next week right here and all week on social media.
With Blue Link Plus, you can access your Hyundai Tucson Limited remotely. Doors unlocked, temperature set, lost car found.
There it is.
Get complimentary class-leading Blue Link Plus. Call 562-314-4603 for complete details.